Good evening. Welcome everyone to the panel on diversity and inclusion, and thank you for your patience on good evening everyone. And I think we're just starting. I might have missed the cue. And welcome to the panel on diversity and inclusion, and thank you for your patience. I think we're all used to technical glitches in our COVID life these days. My name is Heather Sinclair, and my job on this panel right now is to introduce you to Dr. Richard Norman, which I will do in a second. And just for context as to why I'm here, so for those of you in the swim community who would not know me as an official or a coach or a swimmer, I have been working with Swim Ontario on organizational culture and leadership development and a culture mandate for the organization in terms of behaviors to keep, stop, and start specific to culture. And as well, I sit on the Swim Ontario Community Experience Advisory. And so I'm really honored and thrilled to introduce Dr. Richard Norman to you. And if you will indulge me, I am going to read his bio because I really do not want to misspeak or misrepresent the body of work that Richard has in terms of his own career and the work in this space, or misrepresent how that will help to inform our panel tonight. So thank you for that. Richard is a researcher, a lecturer, a futurist, and a strategic consultant who works with people to affect change towards a more socially just, sustainable, and resilient future. His work is focused on the lived experiences of peoples who have been marginalized in our society. And Richard's doctoral research at the University of Waterloo explored the intertwining of race, whiteness, and colonialism in sport, and in the sport of curling specifically, and the deconstruction of dominance within sporting cultures. The research privileges the use of narrative forms aligning with oral traditions held by First Peoples around the world to explore new ways of knowing and understanding. Richard's research is committed to approaches that can open up dialogue and discourses towards a more humane and morally driven worldview. And now his commitment to research continues with the Sport Diversity and Race Project as a postdoctoral fellowship for the Future of Sport Lab at the Ted Rogers School of Management at Ryerson University. And Richard, I know that you bring integrity and sensitivity and compassion and vulnerability to the work that you do, and that you will bring that tonight as you lead through this particular panel, in addition to the body of research that you bring, and some research as well. So we are grateful and thrilled to have you with us tonight. Thank you, and over to you, Richard.
Well, thanks a lot, Heather, and thanks to Swim Ontario. It's great to be here tonight. I really have to work on shortening up my bio, but I'll get to that another time. So I'm really excited to be here and to speak to y'all about, partly my background and partly my other background. So talking specifically about research, but also talking a little bit about my lived experience and what brings us all here today. I'm just going to speak for a little bit, and then I'll introduce our panel and really want to dive into, who they are and, what do they bring from their perspectives and how that can help to inform what's happening for Swim Ontario and the rest of the swimming community. So I'm just going to run through a couple of slides and talk a little bit about why I think that lived experience is really an important part of our conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'll start by positioning myself. And one of the important things that we really have to start to integrate in the way that we understand all of our institutions is that everyone does have a certain positionality when they come into, any environment. And that atmosphere that we bring from our own lived experience is a really important information that helps us to understand what our interactions are going to be within that space. I will, bring your attention to the previous session handled by Laura, who did an amazing job of trying to lay out some of the groundwork that we have to, entertain when we get into this space. It's like learning a new language, and a lot of those kinds of ways of approaching what we're trying to talk about actually need to be brought to the surface before we can continue on. So for myself, there's a whole lot of ways that I can identify myself, and we start to delve into this world of lived experience. We have to be really cognizant about the language that describes the people that are bringing forward their stories. So you can look at me as Black. A lot of the times people will notice that I'm biracial or mixed race or multiracial. But when you start to break down my position even further, I'm cis, I'm hetero, I'm male, there's a whole bunch of other ways to describe who I am, but more importantly, how I go about understanding the world. When I move into my professional career, those personas that I take on don't go away. And they're really important when I understand my relationship to others and also the power and privilege that I have within particular spaces. So what I'm really interested in looking at right now is the intersection of race, diversity, and how that informs what we understand sport to be, particularly from a racialized perspective, but also understanding, the legacy of colonialism. And I think that we're all within this, new era, I'll call it, really aware of what happens when we understand our colonial legacy, particularly in Canada, but also how that might inform the way we understand sport to be. I'm also putting Ryerson in brackets right now because Ryerson is grappling with his own legacy, the name of the institution itself, and transitioning away from the history of the person that it was named after. So again, these are all things that are informing what our conditions, the atmosphere, the situation that's going on right now. When I think of the last 18 months, like two things really jump out at me. And of course, I have to go back to 2020, understanding that COVID has completely reshaped our understanding of recreation and sport and what's happening. So even as we move back into sport, things are changed, things are different. And that long pause we had is an actually important way that we can understand potential changes that happen. Coupled with that, going back to the killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the ensuing protests around Black Lives Matter, and what that's done to reshape society related to understanding anti-Black racism and how that is informing systemic racism within our society at large. Those are really important foundational things when we think about changing sport, because our institutions are not generated out of an arbitrariness. They are not created in some vacuum and just appear miraculously. They're informed by the legacies which affect our whole society at large. So when we think about lived experience, it's really important that we look at lived experience as a new form of knowledge. One of the interesting things that we have within this idea of dominant structures are how our information is actually organized. From the Western, academic standpoint, we understand knowledge, philosophy, theory from a particular standpoint. But there's this whole other way that we can gain valuable perceptions, deep insights into our world. And it is really actually through the experiences that people have and how those interrelate and what those mean as a critical form to look at the rest of our world. And it's really important that we use that to disrupt dominant structures. So one of the things that I, always go back to is people think about, well, why can't we just change racism in Canada? I mean, or they'll talk about it's a very long road. One of the important things to remember about equity, diversity, and inclusion is actually that we are bringing these certain conditions to try to change systems that really don't want to change, or in fact are resistant to the change that we're trying to implement. So for us to look forward to understand how swimming can be different, you have to remember that we're really disrupting systems. And to be able to do that, there are some realities that we have to understand rather than the expectation of where we move forward to. So what does a socially just world actually look like? And we have to ask those really important questions, in particularly about when we look at people who are coming into the sport that are quote unquote different, what realities do they have that we just don't understand, and what are our own expectations about allowing those peoples into our world. So one of the things, again, I want to definitely encourage you, if you haven't looked at Laura McPhee's previous session on equity, diversity, and inclusion, please look at it, because we are really entering in a new era, and there has to be a new language of understanding when we move forward doing that. So a lot of the words that we're going to be talking about tonight in this session in the panel, we're going to touch on a lot of those things. So I really do encourage you to go forward and take a look at those. So I am not a swimmer. I swim, and I have one particular story about how and why it's important to understand lived experience. My son, when he was 6, we went swimming down at Sunnyside, and this is a picture of the pool. And it was where he encountered his first really racist experience. In fact, the details, cause tension as I'm thinking about them today. So when we understand, what is recreation and what is safe spaces, you have to remember that based on the identity of myself and my son, there's a certain, tension that we're always having now walking into those environments. So one of the things that Laura had brought up was this idea of microaggressions. And the problem with understanding it as a microaggression is it's actually not that bad. The problem for somebody that has a lived experience that is based on race, that is based on a certain way of understanding their identity, that microaggression can actually inform a very deep-seated trauma that can be very damaging. So I don't usually use the term microaggressions anymore because it really denotes their impact as being very small. And in fact, it is just racist. It is whatever that situation. So we have to remember that for people with lived experiences, there's a lot of tension about revealing who you are, about bringing those stories forward. And in doing that, there's a lot of emotional labor that goes forward. There's a lot of tension that can be held within our own personalities and our own bodies. So to rely on that as the only form of change is something that we can't rely on. There's also an assumed expertise, and this goes back to, who you call on to try to bring their stories forward. And, luckily we have 3 amazing panelists that are willing to share their insights and their background and their stories. And they have expertise in this. They can talk to specific issues, but that's not for everyone. So the assumption that you have going forward is that you really need to make it clear that yes, you might want their experiences, but it's not theirs to necessarily freely offer, and not for you to ask them. And we have to also take a look at the tokenizing effect of what that does, saying, oh, there's an EDR problem within our sport or within our world. We're going to go to the BIPOC individual, the Black, Indigenous, person of color to help fix that. So again, moving beyond those kinds of tensions. So, but I want to really get into the panel. I don't really want to speak very much because I want to hear from them and what their experiences are. But as you're going forward and you have, some contemplation about what we're going to be talking today, I want you to hold some of these questions in the front of your mind. And, specifically, who owns this change? Who really needs to own this? Who is going to actually do the work? who really needs to get down and share power with those people that don't necessarily have the power right now? And what do we really need to dismantle? And what internal dialogues do we have that we have to challenge to move forward? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to really stop talking because I don't want to hear myself anymore, and I want to hear from our amazing panel. I will introduce, and I'm going to do the same thing that Heather did, and I'm going to read out these bios. I'm going to start with Chantique. Chantique is the head coach of the University of Guelph swim team, coming to Guelph in the fall of 2007 after 4 successful competitive seasons as a Griffin, including 4 OUA All-Star honors and 3 All-Canadian Athlete Awards. Chantique's coaching career began as a part-time coach with the Guelph Marlin Aquatic Club and volunteering with the Guelph varsity team. In 2015, Chantique became an assistant coach in an official capacity and assumed the head coaching duties in 2017. Chantique's extensive swimming career also includes competitions as a life-saving athlete representing Canada at 4 World Championships and 1 Commonwealth Championship between 2008 and 2014. Chantique also coached Team Canada on a European tour and the Commonwealth Festival of Life Saving while continuing to stay involved at the national level as a technical advisor. For Chantique, sport has always been part of life and continues to share swimming's value with anyone that will listen. Welcome, Chantique. Next is Josh Liendo, and he was born in Scarborough, Toronto, after which he went to Trinidad and lived there until he was 10. He's a member of the Canadian Olympic swim team and a Canadian record holder competing in the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games. He began swimming competitively at the age of 10 and is 19 years old right now. Welcome, Josh. Ula is an ombudsperson. Oh, I knew I was going to trip over that one. The Chief Ethics and Conduct Officer for BMO Financial Group. Provides guidance and insight on ethics and conduct management activities across the bank. And she leads a team focused on ensuring that BMO's expectations around ethical business conduct are clear and well understood by employees, while providing support to encourage behavior consistent with BMO's purpose. Ula is accountable for the development and implementation of BMO's Code of Conduct, associated learning, and conduct related to related reporting of senior management and the board of directors. And she also leads a group focused on the impartial review of unresolved Canadian individual or small business customer complaints about BMO's product or service. Ula is recognized as a thought leader with deep industry experience. She is the chair of the Essex Center and past vice president of Toronto Swim Club. Ula has an MBA from Rotman School of Management at University of Toronto. So welcome all. How is everybody doing today?
Pretty good so far.
Doing good.
Yeah, that was a mouthful. I want to hear from you all. Just to start off, we can start wherever you'd like, but wanted to hear your thoughts on, what is the value of your lived experience in related to swimming and changing swimming to be more inclusive, particularly for racialized and marginalized persons. Anybody wants to jump in?
I can start off on that. Just as someone who's been, like swimming, I was like in the sport, going through it, much like these guys. They have a good knowledge of it. I'm sure Chantique has a good knowledge being around swimmers. Just like we are different. That's something you have to acknowledge, something you have to realize. And just growing up, realizing that we can do this. Like there's a stereotype where, Black people can't swim, but we can. And I had the privilege of like going to meets where you see other countries and you just see more and more of us, getting in there and, performing well. So one thing I want to do, from my experience, is, kind of get rid of that stereotype so we can see more color in the water.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to agree with you on that one. It's growing up in swimming. from Brantford, Ontario, and then coming to Guelph, there's definitely not a whole lot of black faces around the pool deck. There's still not a lot of black faces on the pool deck, although there's a few more these days. That's kind of, I'd say that's the biggest difference to most people, just knowing that you're almost always walking into an atmosphere where you're one of very few or maybe even the only black face that you're going to see that day in that area. So being able to change that and make it more comfortable and a place that is more inviting to the BIPOC community is is the goal.
I mean, I can add, but so I come at this from the point of view of a parent. So it's my child who was a swimmer, and I say was, and it's interesting because she just left the sport. She's 16, and I think COVID and everything else, and it made things a bit weird. But she went to rowing, so it's not all bad. She's still on the water, and it's still early mornings. But that being said, so having heard from her the feeling of being different, and she's biracial or she's mixed race, and just being the only and feeling that you're only standing out. So it is kind of neat because I look at Josh, who is 19, and I look at Chantique, who's older. I'm assuming you're older. You don't look older, but you are older. But you have got through it. And I don't know, it's interesting. I think COVID just made my daughter look at everything and try to think about what she really wanted to do. But I think it's, when you talk about lived experiences, it is those critical years, those developmental years for youth, and especially BIPOC youth, that you really have to be mindful. And we'll probably get into it, but be mindful of what they're going through just life, right? Just being a teenager is kind of rough. And then you're competing and the pressures and you're trying to do well, and then you're the only, and then. And I think that's where the inflection point is, that from a sport point of view, that you really have to pay attention, because that makes the difference when kids might quit, that you probably have a higher, I don't know what the actual stats are, but I'd be curious to know the actual retention rate around BIPOC youth when they're like that's just one extra thing, right? Feeling so different all the time.
Absolutely. And I don't know if I was going to ask this question, but I'm going to put it out there. I mean, one of the things we talked about, I mean, you're being one of the few black faces on the pool deck. And I'm wondering if you can sort of put into words, describe the experience of walking into the white space all the time. One of the things I think is hard to translate when we talk about lived experiences, and we talk about, racialized incidents or something like that, is one thing, but just the tension, we're talking about mental health issues, just the tension of walking into, a predominantly white space and having to, hold yourself up and compete. Does anybody have any thoughts about that as a jumping in point for the lived experience?
So just going in on my experience, I'll just jump in. Walking into that pool deck, obviously knowing you're different. I mean, I've gotten more and more respect over the years as I started improving, as I started getting better. But just especially this past year, it's helped me realize that sometimes you do get treated differently because, you're a little different from what they're used to. And you're unique, right? It's something new. Some people, they want to embrace that. That surprises a lot of people. Some people love it, and some people are kind of confused or they shy away from it. One thing I want to talk, Nyack was my home club before I moved to the center and started training high performance. And we had a lot of black boys. We had a relay, and all our relay was black boys. And that's something for me really helped me out in terms of just having that color on the pool deck. But yeah, not always something that I notice for myself, but my teammates, my other black teammates, who I guess wouldn't have the same success as me, they would get less respect, or people would look at them different ways, or be uncomfortable around them because they were different. But just seeing that people were uncomfortable because it was something new. It was something they never saw before. They never saw, 4 black kids on a relay. they never saw something like that before. And but we embraced that, and like over time we realized, you know, we're different, but you know, we're just as good, we're better. There's no reason for us to, you know, feel ashamed or, you know, shy away. So we just, I think the big point is just embracing being different. You don't have to change who you are. You just have to be proud in your own skin.
I think, Chantique, there you are. Okay. But you're on mute. We can't hear you.
There we go.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, I missed all of that. My internet just kicked me out.
Oh, that's fine.
Go ahead,
Would you
John.
like me to just give a little debrief of, or just go again, or?
Why don't you go, and then we'll circle back to Chantique.
Okay.
So what
Yeah,
I was just gonna. Oh no, I'll jump in, Josh. Let me
Yeah.
just jump in. The question was about being different and lived experiences. So I'm not a swimmer, so I can't speak to that. And I don't actually think, to be perfectly honest, if it was like an everyday on the head type of thing that my swimmer experienced, I don't think it is that. But I think that there are moments and there are times when you just realize that you are different, and like silly things, like in the morning after morning practice, her hair, right? And she has biracial hair, so it's just long, curly, but she can't just kind of slip it, you know, take it back and then go, and but her other friends could. So it's those kind of interesting little things that you would notice. And I do think it's different in the urban centers. So in a big center, like in, you know, Toronto, Nyack, Eastman, like those bigger clubs, and where you are, when you're competing with those, with your regular people, that's one thing. But when you start to move into like different locations, then you really see, you really do stand out even more than normal. And even as a swimmer, parent sitting in the stands, right, watching, you can count. So there's that element.
Yeah, talking about lived experiences, and you mentioned things like hair. That's always a big thing. I've changed my hair many times throughout my life. And something as simple as just the comments that I'd get about my hair at the pool and how different it is texture-wise, and trying to do something simpler like put my hair in extensions so I don't have to worry about it. But then there's issues on finding swim caps that will fit extensions and so many different things. But I think I'm lucky that I'm a very competitive person, because like Josh did say earlier, there's often a expectation or that a lot of Black people can't swim. And so I feel like I kind of had that chip on my shoulder from a pretty young age to prove people wrong about that. Because I came from a place that wasn't super diverse, and I've always kind of been in that space, I don't think that chip ever really came off my shoulder. So it almost became normal to me. I didn't notice it as being something that I kind of carried with me on a day-to-day basis until you get to spaces where you realize, oh, hey, now I'm not one of only, and I'm not having to carry this on my shoulders. And you can actually kind of take a deep breath and exhale. And I think I really noticed that a lot this year in the last 18 months. And because there's so much more work happening in EDI and things like the Black Canadian Coaches Association, and being in spaces where I'm surrounded by a lot more Black faces, where I'm finally like, I almost didn't even realize that I had kind of transformed myself, and I carried all these things with me day to day. So yeah, it's just kind of, it was a little bit of insight for me the last 18 months.
Yeah, it's amazing. So, you know, just wanted to put out the question about the challenges for access, and particularly around racialized and marginalized communities, you know, within the sport. What do you see as those things that are holding back the communities of joining, you know, obviously such a, you know, a vibrant sport that you all have been connected with?
You know, let me jump in. I've always remarked, so I have, you know, a professional job and a good job and a big job actually. But it's a flexible job, even before COVID. So I've always remarked, like, who do you see there on a Thursday morning at the Nyack Cup, let's say, sitting in the stands watching their kids swim, right? And it's not people that are essential workers or people that have shift types of jobs. It's people that have laptops or phones or earbuds and taking calls, and they have the ability to conduct their work from wherever they need to be. Or not work even, right? There are a lot of people that aren't working, that, you know, parents that just don't have to work or just aren't working. And that in itself speaks to the barriers that are there, because by definition, your family has to be a kind of family that can afford to do that. And then also with it, the travel meets or even the racing suits. I mean, my daughter was at a level where she's wearing the racing suit and, you know, the top one. I think those, just the way that it's constructed, or even the location. Like, so we're in the west end of Toronto, but I'm up in Markham at 6 o'clock and then back and forth for finals, and, you know, 16 legs of driving over the course of 4 days. It just, not everybody can do that.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really good point. I can definitely relate to that point a lot, because you know, I grew up in Trinidad, grew up in the Caribbean. That's where my family was. Moved here when my mom moved here. Obviously, didn't have any permanent residency or anything like that. My mom had to go to school again in order to be able to work. So just starting off, you know, getting into swimming and, you know, I couldn't always go to, you know, training camps in Florida. I couldn't like always afford to go here. I couldn't go to travel meets all the time. And I feel, I mean, I've been lucky that I've had people that help me and, you know, help me sometimes, you know, get to that training camp, or tell my mom, you know, don't worry about this. You can give it in payments and stuff like that. So I've been lucky, and I feel like we need more people like that who are willing to, you know, help us out, because, you know, it sucks to see, and I've seen it. It sucks to see a kid fail who has a lot of talent, right? And who can make it fail for a reason that they have no control over, right? So that's one big thing, just that barrier. That's something that even if like you change that, and you'll definitely see a lot more colored people in this sport. So that's a big thing. I'm glad you brought that up. That refreshed my memory on some things. So that's definitely a big obstacle. I agree with you.
And then you were good, right? So you probably had coaches and people looking, saying, there's something there. So the willingness to actually help figure it out. Like, don't worry about it. Let's just subsidize or to find the money or to help it happen. But not everybody, most swimmers are not. It's a very, very small percentage, just this crazy pyramid. It's a very small percentage that hit the top. And so it depends from swimming for development or for pleasure or just competitive, but not crazy competitive, like, you know, central, you know, like a central regions. It's those people that I would worry about the most, because I think the cream, somebody's always going to help the top swimmers figure it out, because it's to everybody's advantage, right?
Yeah, I feel like 100%. Like I feel even like I developed a little later, but I had in terms of my swimming career, some people might disagree, but because I'm still young, but just that barrier, right? Just starting off, and obviously you see kids who can't always make it to practice, right? They got to go, like, you know, babysit their kids because their parents are, or babysit their little brother, little sister because their parents are at work. Just, you know, if we can just help those kids, right? Because everyone has the potential, you know, to make it here, to make it where I am, where, you know, where you see the top level swimmers are. Like anyone can do it with the right mindset. But what I don't want to see is someone just lose their opportunity over something they have no control of. So yeah, I feel like that's a really good point.
Yeah, I can echo everything the both of you have been saying. And I'm super grateful that once I was in university, there were programs like Quest for Gold that gave me a little bit of money. I was never nationally carded, and I worked all through university, which is hard when you're a full-time student and training so many hours a week. it makes it very difficult. But even before that, your family definitely has to make a lot of sacrifices, and sometimes families just can't make those sacrifices. Like, it's not even an option. So, like, yeah, we didn't have any family vacations growing up because we had to save money so we could go to swim meets. But for some people, that doesn't cut it. Like, family vacation might never have been an option to begin with to move money around. So I'd say financially is one of definitely the biggest barriers that faces people when there's so many other sports where you're like, all right, I can spend a few $100s and my kids can be in this great rec program for an entire year, versus even being at a regional level in swimming and the cost is thousands of dollars. So there's a really, really big difference. And that in and of itself definitely puts a lot of roadblocks up for people. And when you match that with, like we've already discussed, the lack of representation in the sport, there's a lot of questions, or a lot of parents, I would think, who are like, why am I going to bother? Why am I going to put that extra stress on my child? Why am I going to go through all these steps and pay all this much more money when they could have fun and be more comfortable and be one of many instead of one of the few in another sport? So I think those are probably the biggest roadblocks to getting more of the BIPOC community into the sport.
That's interesting. I want to come back to what I call the pyramid or the spire of, who goes up into the high performance. Just to all the people that are out there, if you do have questions for our panel, please use the chat, enter them there, and I will relay them when I can to the panelists. So we're talking about, how complex this issue is to really get, BIPOC representation within the sport. We've thought of, the financial aspect, but if so few really go through to the high performance, no offense, Josh and Chantique, but, so if we're looking at the club level, what has to happen at that level to really make the sport more inviting other than the financial? Are there other kinds of areas that we really need to focus on?
I think at the club level, I think what needs to happen is the people that are running the clubs have to recognize that there is this issue or there's an opportunity. And because, I'm just thinking of where we came from, so I can't remember. I think it was like 535 swimmers. And at the top of the club, there's 50, roughly. There might be 60 now. And so that's a lot of other swimmers that are there for different things. So it's not just about the high performance. I mean, you have to have your high performance stream, and that's very exciting. And there's some really cool stuff that happens there. But the day-to-day impact of swimming and the joy that people get from being in the water and the joy that they get from just the exercise and being with their friends can't be underestimated also. So if you want to retain, so let's say somebody doesn't have the barriers, they figured out how to get in. How do you retain people in the sport? And it's really about being aware of what could be going on. And I would argue that last summer and George Floyd and everything that happened after that has really, really made things very acute for individuals, for BIPOC peoples everywhere, and kids, and also social media. And this current generation of kids they won't accept it anymore. Like, everybody's calling everybody out very, very clearly and in very good words and in strong words. And just so it'll be interesting what happens in the future generations, basically, because I think things have to kind of change and people have to recognize how do you make sure that everybody feels welcome. So for instance, I have an interesting story. So my daughter, this is several years ago, there was a coach that was writing out a set and said, okay, guys, so, from an exertion point of view, this is what I want. And he drew faces. So there was, like white face. And then if you're doing it really well, then your cheeks are red. And my daughter had her other mixed race friend turn and said, like, really? Our cheeks are never going to get red. Right. And that's just a matter of speaking and an exertion thing. But it's just being aware that even if you say that and you don't mean anything bad by it, the intentions are benign. The impact is intense. Right. And then she'll still tell that story. This is years ago. So I think at the club level, it's just a recognition that things aren't all alike, and you have to realize how people feel.
Yeah, I really like that comment, because it's something I've definitely come across a bunch of times. Like, oh, like, you're not red. Like we don't really get red. We don't get red cheeks. So yeah, so something like that. But it's just there. I feel like we need to get more knowledge. Like they just don't know. It's just a lack of knowledge, lack of understanding. That's something that we need to kind of, like bring into the sport, and that's why we need to find ways to break these barriers, find ways to get more kids in it. And then just like hopefully one day we're gonna look at us as, that's a swimmer, that's not a black swimmer, it's not the only black swimmer. I want look at them as, as an athlete, not as, the color of their skin, just they start looking at us as athletes, just like everyone else. That's how it should be. And that's how I think it should be.
Yeah, I think one of the issues with it is there's the lack of knowledge because there has been such a lack of representation, right? We've never had to think about the language we use because it's generally just white faces, right? So it's a non-issue. You've never had to think about it in terms of somebody who has a black face. So the fact that there hasn't been that representation, there hasn't been that education, and there's not that background of knowledge plays a big role into it. And I think without being intentional on how we get people into the sport, a lot of that won't change. A lot of people get into the sport of swimming because their family members, siblings, or parents were swimmers, and it's something that's kind of passed down. That's very common in the sport of swimming. There's so many sports out there, but a lot of swimmers come from swimmers, and so it just kind of goes back generations and generations. So if you're looking back in the history of the BIPOC community, there's definitely not going to be a very big pool of people to pick from. A lot of people's parents don't know how to swim or didn't swim, and so it's definitely not going to be the first thought for them to put their kids into the sport of swimming. I think now it has become a lot more of a life-saving skill, and so we will teach our kids to swim. But thinking of it in terms of sport is something a little bit different. So I think without that intentional piece, we're not going to see a lot. We're not going to see a major shift in how our sport is being diversified.
So, picking up on that idea of intentionality, and okay, I'm outside swimming. Sell me on swimming. Why should I swim? If you can articulate that, I mean, to get that, what is it about swimming that draws you in, that keeps you in the sport, that wants to connect you with the sport? Sell me in 2 minutes. Go.
I could try. I don't know. I feel like I'm one of the crazy people who just absolutely loves the water. I love everything about being in the water. I love how it feels. I love that it's a sport that you can literally do your entire life. It's the sport that doctors and physiotherapists and everybody's like, yeah, get in the water. It's great for your body, full body workout, all those things. I love everything about it, and I think it's such a fantastic sport. It opens up so many opportunities. It teaches you so many life skills because it's an individual sport, and it really comes down to how much you're willing to put into it is going to be how much you're going to get out of it, and it's kind of all based on you. I don't know. I just love the sport of swimming. I just love the pool, but that's just me.
Yeah,
so I can tell you from a parent's point that I'll let Josh, the actual elite swimmer right now, finish off. But from a parent's point of view, it's the discipline. So the discipline required to get up, no matter when you went to bed, and to get yourself to the pool and to jump in the water and to go. to be on time. The training meets, the travel meets teaches, my daughter, like she can pack her bags to go anywhere, and I don't have to worry because she knows what she's doing. Like she really does. Like that ability to focus, those are skills that maybe she had, but I believe that they got developed by 6 years of increasingly more and more swimming, and also that mental strength. Because it is kind of boring, right? Like it's got to be like training's kind of boring. You're like that black line, just you and that black line, and at the wall you say hi to somebody, you go back. It's very different than her current sport, where there's a lot more social piece to it. So I think those are the things I would highly advocate from a parent's point of view, and just how to get your stuff done, because you have to get homework done in between little snippets, but you have to get it all done. So, but Josh, you were there, you were in it. So what do you think?
Yeah, so you guys have like really good points there. But one thing I love, and I've always loved, is competing, right? And just everything about the meets, about competition, the people you meet, and that's like, it's a great way to like earn respect, right? There's a lot of respect in the sport, I feel, especially, and it definitely comes out during competition. Like I've met like a lot of people, like a lot of good friends through like racing, right? Race, and whether that's from around the world, when I go to like meets abroad, you earn that respect when there's a race, and I feel like that's a really good thing about this sport. And like also, like you said, swimming is boring, and it is true. Training can be very boring.
Training's boring.
Yeah,
Racing's very
like,
fun, but the up and down.
100%. Yeah. And I feel like now people are looking more into swimming. Like you see like these great athletes, whether it's football players, basketball players, like they're learning to swim, or they're like, they say, I swim for recovery and this and that, I really love swimming. And like it was like surprising to me, and also like motivating to me, because like these guys like this sport. Obviously they may play something else, but it's something that they enjoy and they connect to. So I feel like it's a really good sport to be in.
That's great. We have a question from one of the audience members, directed for Chantique, but I want to expand what the sentiment is here, saying, can you talk about the lack of representation in the coaching ranks? But I wanted to talk about just representation overall, whether it be at the club level, even through the governance structure in clubs, and how the NSO, like, what does representation mean to the sport, and what would it mean if we saw those different faces, or whatever we'll say.
Yeah, I'll go first on that one. So yeah, I mentioned earlier how important representation is, and I guess I have two kind of quick stories about it. One was at my first OUA championships in 2018 as a head coach, and they were at U of T. And so sometimes schools will bring their classes in to watch prelims as part of like phys ed and stuff like that for a field trip. And I had a parent come up to me. Her kid used to swim for the Marlins and trained with me, and she was a teacher. She'd brought her class in, and they're from a kind of an inner city school in Toronto, and they came to watch, and she was telling me how excited they were when they saw me on the pool deck, because there were almost no Black faces there, and it was a school that had a really high BIPOC, a high number of BIPOC students. And she was saying that their faces just kind of lit up to see that there was somebody who looked like them on the pool deck, and not just somebody who looked like them, but somebody who was in charge of a team and the head coach of a team, and able to do that. And that kind of stuck with me, especially because that was my first OUAs, and I'd never really thought of it. And for that to make a difference, even in a bunch of like elementary school kids, to see, be like, oh, hey, maybe we do belong here. It's not completely unrealistic that we could do this, or that we could achieve these goals. makes a huge difference, and it made a big difference for a lot of those kids. I'm one of 2 Black head coaches in varsity swimming. Jackie Beckford Enriquez at University of Waterloo being the other one. We got hired almost at the same time. But outside of the 2 of us, I don't know if there's ever been another head coach of a varsity team in all of Canada. I would have to go back in the history books. But as far as varsity coaching goes, they're very, very, very few and far between. And then you mix that with the intersectionality of there being female head coaches in the sport, and it gets even smaller. So the representation piece is so important, and you don't even realize it, or I know I didn't even realize it until I was actually living it, because I know I didn't have any Black faces in the swim world really to look up to when I was swimming, and there was Cullen Jones in the States who was like, that was pretty much it. So it just plays such a huge part. And even though it might seem like a very, very small thing, just being that face on the pool deck and showing that it's not impossible can make a huge difference for a lot of kids and people in the sport. So.
I don't know.
Oh,
Go ahead, Josh.
yeah. Oh, I really liked your comment there about and that story about, you know, kids coming up to you and you know, the teacher coming up to you and saying, oh, like, we're so happy to see you. That's definitely something that's really motivating. You know, that just shows that you're a role model, right? One of the only Black women coaching, and that's a big thing, you know, to be a role model like that. That's something that, you know, I have a chip on my shoulder, because I know that, you know, kids look up to me. I get like messages and, you know, people saying, you know, love to see someone like you in the water and doing the things that you do. It's really motivating, right? And I hope just something like that can get kids looking, and like what you said, like not feel alone. They, you know, like, we can do this, right? Like just having an example, having representation, it's so important. And I feel like the more representation we can have, you're talking about role models, someone can have a role model to look up to. It's likely that, you know, they want to follow them, they want to kind of sometimes want to emulate them. And so like I want to do what he does, because, you know, I look up to him. He's my role model. So that's something I really can identify with. I can really relate to you there on that. And I feel like if we just get more representation, and, you know, I understand my place as a role model. I've realized it a lot recently. It's definitely come up, and yeah, so I've realized it, and I definitely I understand it's a big responsibility. And I just want to do my best, you know, for those looking up and looking on. It's definitely a big. I'm sorry. I'm just so, like, sometimes it's overwhelming. I'm thinking like, oh, like I'm the only one. I got to be good all the time. But I just feel like just me being here and representing. I hope that it gets a lot of kids in the sport, and a lot of kids can look up to me and say, you know, we can all do this. You know, we can all go ahead and go swim.
I think so. A couple of things. Like, quick answer: it's the same thing for the volunteers and the officials. The representation's slim to none. And I'm going to be a little bit provocative, because I don't know that it's going to change anytime soon. Because when you look at the cycle to develop or to hatch a coach, right, and then to hatch a varsity coach, like to hatch a coach, to hatch a head coach or an assistant head coach, you know, then to go up the whole thing, there just aren't enough people. So, you know, it's kind of is the way it is for now, for the time being. And also, when you look at the people that are in the community, let's talk about Ontario. It's people that have been doing this for a very long time. So it's it's interesting. You almost have to be willing to, like a club would, because that's where the training ground would come from. A club would have to be willing to take a flyer on an unproven talent, let's say, and bring them in, a BIPOC person. But then I can just think of the parents, and I think of the kind of parents of which I was one, from like, you know, these urban centers where you could do that because you have enough coaching staff to kind of train. It might be like, well, who is this person? And they, what are their credentials? And it becomes this very weird thing. It's like a vicious cycle, which is unfortunate. I do think eventually, maybe, but you know, to the earlier points that we made about keeping people in the sport or getting them in, the barriers are going to impact what the output is down the line, right? So I just don't know, you know, I'm trying to think, right? And then I'm just looking at some of the actual questions and about positive space and individuals in a rural company that is largely white. I would say the person who's living in a rural community that is largely white is living that day in, day out. So I think it's just recognizing that, and it's helpful to even ask the question, because then you understand, and maybe just sometimes when things are happening in the broader world, that you can make an assumption will have an impact on them. Just say, how are you doing? Just kind of ask them, reach out. And then you can even say, and this happened at work too, like last summer when people said, I don't know what to say, but I just know it's kind of weird now. And if there's anything you need, and you know, you just be honest, basically, be as authentic as you can, recognize it. And that makes somebody who's in a rural area not feel by themselves, not feel alone. Right? So I kind of jumped a bit, but that question
like
kind of caught my eye. So.
And you know, continuing like down that, I'm joined by 3, you know, Black people involved in swimming. I kind of feel I want to swim, so it's possible out there. But
Masters swimmer.
There you go. Right. But thinking about, you know, the clubs, and you know, there's 2 things that popped in my mind. We have a predominantly white sport. So first is, you know, the fear of asking those questions, of making a misstep, of stepping on people's toes, particularly when right now things are, you know, in focus around mental health issues with BIPOC people, with, you know, the anti-Asian hate that, you know, was surfacing around COVID. So there's that side of it. And then the other side, which is, what do we have to worry about speaking for others? And particularly, you know, if somebody, I don't know, if you're a white face and you have a Black friend and you're using that Black friend as the way that I understand the Black experience and speaking for them, what are the concerns that, you know, people really should be aware of?
I honestly think, and maybe because I'm older, and you know, you just lead with humility and just say, I don't want to mess up. I don't know. I don't understand. I want to understand. And yeah, how can you help me? But just to say, I'm here if there's anything. And I know it's kind of weird. It's kind of tough, but I don't get it. And I don't want to make a mistake. And I have friends that have said those exact same things. Like one of my, you know, earliest, when everything started happening, that a friend of mine had moved away, and she texted me and said, I'm thinking about this. I don't know what to say. I have to say something. I don't know what to say. And I'm just really sorry, right? And it's not for her to be really sorry, but it's just that kind of like, I don't know type of thing, versus trying to say, can you help me? Tell me, help me understand. Then what you don't want to say is, teach me about this. Tell me all the history. What do I need to know? What should I do? Because that you can find on like Google, right? You don't have to ask your Black friend or colleague to give you that information, because that's just too much work. But you can just kind of say, I'm not sure, but I know there's something, and I'm there for you.
Yeah, Ula, I think you kind of nailed it there. Talking with a lot of other Black coaches this past year, and something like, I think the month of February, being Black History Month this past year, was probably one of the most exhausting months of my life, because when you're the Black representation and it's Black History Month and everything's been going on, everybody wants to talk, everybody wants to interview, everybody wants to ask all the questions, and I was very happy when the month was over. But it kind of comes back to that, right? Because nobody wants to misstep. Nobody wants to say the wrong thing or offend you. And I think the biggest thing people can do is, just kind of acknowledge that they're trying to do the right thing, and be willing to put a little bit of work in for themselves, because there are so many resources out there that individuals can educate themselves on without always having to go and ask the super specific, well, what do you want me to do? And I'm like, well, that might be different coming from different people, and it puts a lot of pressure on me or on the BIPOC community. So it's just kind of acknowledging that they may have work to do, and maybe steering them in the right direction, but not necessarily doing all the work for them, is kind of what it comes down to.
Yeah, I feel like both of you nailed that. That's it's a big thing, just helping people. If more people would understand, then we would have less problems. If more people would, be more concerned with what we're going through, and just try to understand, or at least, just show that they're making an effort to basically say, well, I don't know what you're going through, but if you want to talk, or if you want to kind of just help me just understand, what I can do, just what they're doing on what they have to do on their part. I think you guys made some great points there. Just there's a bunch of resources out there, and if we have more and more people getting educated and understanding, then we'll have less I guess issues and instances where there's racism and stuff like that, because hopefully if more people get educated and more people, you're always going to have the kind of odd now and then where you get a comment or something like that. It's going to happen, but if we just get more people kind of standing up and saying, this isn't right, just kind of reinforce that it's not right to treat the BIPOC community different. So you guys made some great points there, and that's all I have to say about that.
That's great. I mean, thinking about one of the comments that you made, Josh, it's about the burden sometimes, and Chantique, reflecting back on Black History Month, thinking a little bit about that, the pressures, that potentially, an up and coming, competitive swimmer has. What kinds of supports, maybe even from your own backgrounds, do you think that we're missing that, would be great to have in this day and age, in this quote unquote new era that we're in?
I think I can start off on that, and I'll just say people, just you said, talk about the background and stuff like that. People just saying, you belong here, just reinforcing that in your mind. Say, we're so I had people give me some messages, we're proud of what you've done, and just having that, just knowing that there's people behind you, there's a community behind you that's kind of pushing you forward and telling you, you can do anything, we believe in you. I feel like that's a big thing, and that really helps. It's definitely an amazing feeling to be able to have that.
I think you've hit it, Josh. I mean, it's the extra level of support, the explicit support. And I'm not saying that if they're not a good swimmer to kind of, blow smoke and just pretend. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just talking about the fit and just making people feel really, really welcome. And part of it, and that extra bit of support, I think would be what would be helpful, and also try to increase numbers. So that goes to it. I'm just looking again. There was a question about what, if there was a wish, and I think the wish would be find a way to do outreach to increase your numbers. And I recognize that's not possible everywhere, but in the centers where it is, I think there should almost be, I don't want to say requirement, but a deep encouragement that clubs of a certain size should actually focus on trying to bring in swimmers at different levels and recognize that you might have to help support them through carpools or through money or through funding or whatever. But just to try to get the numbers up somehow, I think that would go a very long way to making people feel supported, that background support.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I meant when I talked a little bit earlier about that intentionality in trying to make those things happen. And if people were listening to Laura McPhee's presentation yesterday, and she talked about what equality means and how that doesn't necessarily fit, I think this is one of those situations where you're not always going to be able to treat everybody equally, because some people really do need extra supports, and that makes a difference. And I feel like this is one of those situations where equality across the board doesn't really work. It hasn't worked for us in the past. And so being intentional with those things, whether it is, carpooling, or whether it's finding grants or anything along those lines, just to help others realize that, we want you here and we're going to give you support in order to be able to make this happen, is what will make a difference.
I really like that point that you said there about, the equality thing. And like one thing, even my coaches have noticed differently that, and this is, I've said what I said earlier, that we're different, and we have to embrace being different. Also, even things in training, my body, I'm not like a typical swimmer. And I'm just talking on the physical side, I am different than what they're used to. So there's different things in training where they realize, you can do this better than some people, but maybe not necessarily this. There's different ways. So even recently, I think my coaches have definitely learned a lot about me as an athlete. I just feel if more coaches kind of had that knowledge, as you said, they can increase the numbers, right? It's not that a swimmer isn't good enough. They just don't respond to the same type of training that you give these other athletes. So I feel like the point that Ula and you, Chantique, said is really good, because that just got me thinking about how, I'm lucky I have coaches who are, really focused on high performance and always try to see how to get your athlete to the next level. Like, what more can you do? How can we fine tune this? And then they've learned more about me as an athlete, just physically. So that's definitely a big thing. Quality. You said we can't kind of treat everyone equal, and that's true. I believe in that 100%. People respond to different things. So that comment there really got me thinking. Just, we have different bodies, we are different, and we need to be treated in a way that works for us.
Awesome. All right, because it's Swim Ontario, and I can be as critical as I want because I'm not part of it. I'm going to ask the question. What should be the responsibility of Swim Ontario, Swim Canada? What role should they play, and what's missing?
Asking the hard questions.
I get to. All right. As much as you can think about. Is there one area that you'd focus on, that is missing, other than growing numbers and maybe access? If you take a look at the sort of the governance structure, or what the NSO, PSO, how that operates, are there things that we're just missing within this conversation?
I think education. I think we mandate everybody to have all kinds of education to be on deck. And I think some work around implicit biases. I think just some understanding and some current knowledge too would be helpful. And I would go as far as say that it should be mandatory repeated. So regularly mandatory, and not necessarily an online, which this is a wish, right? So this is like not necessarily practical, but not an online situation. Have some in-person work that is done with individuals on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I think of Swim Ontario, Swim Canada, kind of the way I think of the university system. And I know the University of Guelph has put in quite a few different educational pieces for coaches, and EDI is one of the newer ones in the last couple of years, specifically for coaches. Just like you said, that education piece is very important. And so that's a mandatory thing that you have to do on a yearly basis. So I think that is probably the biggest thing that we don't currently have. You kind of mentioned all the other pieces like, numbers and whatever. And that's honestly, that's going to take a really, really long time to build. But in speaking right now, yes, that education piece could definitely be helpful because people don't know what they don't know, to be honest. And so giving people that a little bit of extra knowledge, I think, could help.
Yeah, and that's one of the best points, knowledge. But even like going back to that point of representation, just having somebody, you know, in the higher ups, like someone of color, you know, someone calling the shots who understands where we come from, right? Someone who can basically change the system. What I want to say, someone in power, who has color. So that I feel like that could make a big change in the sport, and then that's basically the one big thing that I had on my mind.
Awesome. Definitely want to come back and talk about youth, but quick question about, you know, what you see the future of the sport to be, and you know, what it might become. I mean, I'm thinking about myself now. I'm apparently going to be a masters swimmer and all that kind of thing. You know, what does the future of the sport really look like? You know, beyond just getting, you know, a whole bunch of BIPOC kids into the sport.
I would say just the technology of the sport too. Going back to the point earlier about the quality and how physically we're different. We don't have to be separated from anyone or do completely different practices, but if we get that understanding of basically how different swimmers work and how they can respond to different things, there's going to be some more kids in it, but we're going to start seeing more success from the Black community, which I feel is really important. So if like basically all the points that we had before just coming together, just the knowledge of the, you know, people on deck, the coaches, the officials, if everyone just around the sport can, you know, get their knowledge better, I feel like it's going to be a welcoming sport for, you know, people like me, people like Chantique and Ula. It's going to be a more welcoming sport, like a better community for us, and that's what I see for the future.
I think the future is more kids are going to want to swim. The numbers may not go sky high, but they will increase. And I think the Olympic showings, I mean, it's very exciting. It was, you know, one of the great things about Tokyo is that the swimming events were in the evening. So you can have families sitting down, talking about swimming, watching swimming, getting excited. And I do think that it is one of those sports. Chantique said you can do anywhere. So my daughter hasn't ruled out varsity swim, right? She's just taking a break now. She has 2 more years. She'll add something else, and she goes, maybe I'll swim again, and I bet she will, right? It's just because you don't lose that love of it. So it's not all bad. It's not doom and gloom, but I can't see it going anywhere because it is a really cool sport.
Yeah, that's great, and it follows a point from Ken Fitzpatrick, who just highlighted our successful people at all levels of color, the general public and grassroots. And one of that question, you know, following, what's the role of the media in this? You know, we haven't seen much attention from media in relation to swimming per se. You know, do we need to call out media? You know, who should be putting some of that pressure?
I think it's because it's not pro, right? So it's not, I mean, the ISL net new, something new, but up until then, it's not like tennis or soccer or hockey or, like name all the sports where people go on to make tons of money doing their sport. And like my daughter will say, people even used to say, well, swimming isn't a sport because, it's, so there's that whole other conversation. That's for another day. But I think the media just hasn't taken the interest because you don't have the big purses and you don't have the big budgets and you don't have the TV and all those other pieces.
100%.
Yeah.
Swimming gets the highlight every 4 years in the Olympics, and it's definitely one of the most watched sports. Like when you look at the stats at the Olympics, tons of people will watch it every 4 years and get excited, and it's great to see Canada doing so well on the world stage. But outside of that, there's not a whole lot, and unless people know the athletes, they don't get super interested in it. There's not a team that you can follow along like you can with like the Raptors or the Jays and stuff like that. So it's kind of tough because media is kind of driven by money, and there's not necessarily a ton of money in filming swim meets. So that's kind of a tough one. But once every 4 years, we get the highlight reel, which is nice.
Yeah, that is true, and I think that's something that's I don't think it can really change the way the media is set up, or I think it'll be really hard to change just because of how the media works. Like I've definitely learned a lot about how media works, and like you are right, they start caring more, leading up to a big event, where there's like a lot of exposure and stuff like that, and they don't really focus in, after, let's say, the Olympics, after it's done. They kind of just do the build up, do a little bit after, but yeah, just those times in between, it's not really, you don't get that attention. And I don't know if that's something you can kind of call out and change. It's definitely, the media is definitely unique in the way they do things. But I think that's just the way that is in terms of media.
Great. I'm aware that our session time is coming to a close, so I wanted to put it back to the three of you and just your final thoughts in next steps, either personally or what you'd like to see the sport do. Any final thoughts?
I can go. So beyond the aspirational, grow the numbers. I think for people that are here now, today, tomorrow, the first thing is just like listen, like just try to digest what you've heard tonight, and just recognize that those swimmers that are in your midst, that are BIPOC, that are different, they're feeling it, and they know that they're different. You don't have to treat them necessarily differently, but just recognize that and be authentic with them, and just do your best.
I don't know that I have a whole lot more to add other than, I think we went through a fair bit of stuff tonight. So a lot for people to kind of dig into and thinking about how it affects them personally. But I appreciate that we're having these discussions and that people are willing to listen, and hoping that alone will just kind of make some more steps towards where we want to be. So I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, it's definitely been a great opportunity. I think just having this conversation, I think we need more of this, right? People talking about, especially people who have experiences, just talking about what it's like, getting an inside view. I think that's also the knowledge part, right? People are going to get more knowledge from seeing, people like me, Chantique and Ula, and Dr. Richard, just having chats like this and talking. I feel like that's going to help them at least understand a little bit better, and it's definitely going to get more people interested.
Well, that's fantastic. I want to thank the three of you, Ula, Josh, and Chantique, for joining in today, and also Swim Ontario for inviting us. It was amazing to hear all your perspectives and share your knowledge. I hope that there will be another opportunity to do this again. It was great to meet you all, and hopefully I'll see you in the pool, apparently, because now I'm joining swimming.
Look forward to seeing you on deck.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Bye.